What is up, everybody, and welcome to this week's video. In this week's video, I'm going to be talking about how to edit images in Lightroom. Even if you don't have any Lightroom experience, or if you do, this will be a great video for you to just learn how I edit images in Lightroom. I'll even show you how to add a little bit of glow, add a little bit of light on the side, do a little vignette, the whole 9 yards. We're going to be walking through it. And I've busted through this as quickly as I can, so I would recommend just pausing the video at certain spots where you want to do it to your image. I highly recommend doing this alongside one of your images. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so I've already got my image open in Lightroom here, and the first thing that I think I want to do to this image is do a crop. I can already tell kind of this background isn't as interesting, the hills aren't green, and I kind of just want to focus on the green hills here. So to crop in Lightroom, you just simply go up to this box right here. You can click it, and you can just drag this down. Now, if both sides are coming in, it's because the lock is on, which means that it's locking the proportion that it's in, which is 2:3 right now. I can uncheck the lock, and then it'll allow me to freely drag each side. I'm going to crop it about like that, and you can hit enter or return when you are happy with how it looks. And then the first thing that I want to do on most of my images is come down to the lens corrections tab. I want to enable the profile corrections and remove the chromatic aberration. I do that on pretty much every photo. And then the next thing that I want to do is go up to the top. Now this photo is a little dark, so the first thing that I want to do is bring up the exposure. And that's looking much better, but you can see that now it's very low contrast. It's a raw file, so it's very, very washed out. So what I'm going to do is add contrast. It's going to be the first thing that I'm going to do. And I might increase the exposure and add more contrast. And I don't want to add too much on the slider here. I can also create more contrast by coming down here into the highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. So let's go ahead and do that. Reduce the highlights a touch. Let's reduce the shadows as well. And maybe we'll increase the whites and we'll decrease the blacks. And there's a little bit more contrast. And now I'm noticing that the image is very yellow toned. I want it to be more green toned. The hills were definitely bright green when I was out there. This was springtime in the Palouse here. So I want to go towards blue here just a little bit. And this works in really fast. So sometimes I'll just click on the box and use my arrow keys. And it's looking a lot better. Somewhere about right in there is looking good. Maybe a couple more points towards green. Yeah, and so one thing that I'm looking at when I'm balancing the white balance is the things that are not supposed to be green, how do they look? So for example, this brown dirt here, I don't want the brown dirt to be toned green. You can see if I do Command plus to zoom in here, that the dirt still looks fine, I think. So I'm going to leave that as is. Let's go ahead and go down to the texture, clarity, and dehaze sliders. On an image like this, I might do a little bit of texture. This can get pretty out of hand, so don't do too much. I usually like to zoom in by doing Command plus in order to see the texture being applied, see exactly what it's doing in my image. And same thing with the clarity. So we're going to go about 15 or so points on the texture and probably about the same on clarity. As a general rule of thumb, I don't usually exceed 20 points on either the texture or the clarity, or dehaze for that matter. I can click Command 0 to zoom back out. And now I might, depending on what you want to do here with the image, you can leave the dehaze as is, you can add dehaze or reduce dehaze. If you reduce dehaze, it's going to give it more of kind of an atmospheric effect. I shot this with a telephoto lens, so I like kind of giving it that far away look, like you're looking through a lot of atmosphere. So for that reason, I'm going to reduce the dehaze a little bit. And maybe I will add more contrast by adjusting the whites and the blacks. That's looking pretty good. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is go down to the Vibrance and Saturation. I'm probably going to increase both. Vibrance is going to target more of the underrepresented or colors that are not quite as saturated. whereas saturation is just going to increase the intensity of all the colors equally. So usually I will add more vibrance and not a lot of saturation. Somewhere about in there is looking good. And the nice thing about Lightroom here is that at any point in time, if we feel like we need to adjust something that we did earlier, it's easy to go back up. So now I'm noticing it might be a little too yellow. So let's go ahead and go towards blue here. Just a little bit. And maybe we'll drop the vibrance just a touch. Okay. That's looking pretty good. So that is our basic tab there. I'm going to go ahead and close that down. The other thing that I want to do is go to detail, and I want to do a little bit of sharpening here. So when you're sharpening, for landscape photography, I always prefer to have the detail at 100 and the radius at 0.5. And then I can use this masking tool to decide what's going to get sharpened. We don't want to sharpen the whole image because the problem is we'll be sharpening spots that shouldn't be sharp. We only want to sharpen the edges. So you can hold the Alt Option button and click and drag this masking, and what is white is going to be being sharpened versus what is black is not, which is good because you can see how I'm just selecting the edges now. Somewhere about in there feels right. And remember, I'm holding Alt Option while I was doing that. And now I'm going to zoom in here and adjust the sharpening. Okay, and you can see we don't want to add too much noise here. We just want a little bit. Don't overdo it with the sharpening. You should, zoomed all the way out, you probably won't be able to tell that you sharpened. We just want to sharpen it just a little bit so it looks nice if you were to print this or do anything with it later. So that's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and close that tab. Now I'm going to go back up to the top, and I'm going to kind of work down through the tabs that we haven't gone through yet. The first thing that I'm going to talk about is this tone curve here. The tone curve is a really powerful tool to create some really cool looking scenes. So I might try a few of these sliders, and you can see that if I adjust the highlights, it's not really affecting that much because there isn't any super bright highlights in my scene other than here and maybe right on the edges. But if I grab the lights, we're going to get much more of a selection, and we can really pop that sunlight and make it look really bright on those hills. Somewhere about in there looks good. Now I'm going to add even more contrast to the scene by reducing the darks. And we will do the same. Let's go ahead and increase the shadows a little bit though. Just want to kind of bring back a little bit of that darkness. And you can see that we've just kind of added a little punch to the highlights. So using the highlights and the light sliders is a really great way to pop your image. It's kind of one of the final steps that I take on a lot of my images that I'll fully edit through. So tone curve is really great for doing things like that. Next, we're going to go to the HSL color here. And this is going to be kind of your go-to for all things color. So if I wanted to adjust the greens here, I could do that, or really whatever you want to do. So what I want to try though is making these kind of yellows a little more green. So to do that, we're going to go to the hue slider. And you can see that the hue sliders, the color on the slider changes, so it shows you what you're changing your color to. Whereas saturation, the color intensifies, so you're increasing the saturation. And luminance, the color goes from dark to light, so you're increasing the lightness of each color. So let's go up to the hue, and we're going to go adjust the yellows towards green. And you can see that's making a really good adjustment there. Let's just toggle that. Perfect. So I think that's looking pretty good. I'm liking the more green look. Maybe a little too green now. Let's go right there. And just playing with the greens here, seeing if I want to adjust the greens more towards yellow. I think I'm going to leave that at 0. So if I wanted to adjust the saturation, I could do that here. I could make the greens more green. I could try and pop the yellows more, but I don't really want to adjust the saturation. I think it looks good. I do want to adjust the luminance, however. So I'm going to increase the luminance of the greens and increase the luminance of the yellows. And this is another great way to kind of pop that sunlight, is by increasing the luminance. So that's kind of how I go about using the HSL slider. You can see that is the change we've made. So I don't generally use split toning, and for that reason we are going to skip it. The detail we already talked about, the sharpening. You can also do a little bit of noise reduction here. So I could zoom in. Usually on a photo like this, I've shot it at ISO 100. I don't need a lot of noise reduction, but sometimes a little bit can help. Don't overdo this, otherwise your landscape photo will start to look like a painting. So I usually don't recommend doing more than 25 to 40 points of noise reduction. We'll close that. We've already done the lens corrections. We are not going to do anything in transform. And in effects, you can go ahead and do your vignette here, or you can build a custom vignette. So if I was going to vignette this and be done, I could just throw this on just like that, and we would be good to go. But I want to show you guys a couple more tricks here, so let's hold off on that vignette. So what I want to show you here is kind of how to add some light coming from the right side, as well as how to build a little custom vignette. So we've got all these tools up here, and these are our local adjustments. So we can go up to this circle, which is like our radial filter is what it's called. And I'm going to go over here because I want to zoom out on this photo and click right here. And usually I like 1 to 4 just because it backs us up a little bit, but not too far. And the reason I want to do this is because the adjustment that I'm making, I want the circle to be outside the photo and have it really feathered, because any adjustment you make, you want it to be very, very feathered so that people can't tell that you made an adjustment. We want things to be seamless. So I'm just going to draw my circle here. Let's go about something like that. And you can see that these settings over here are what is going to be applied inside the circle. So right now I'm doing nothing, but if I like increase the exposure, you can see it brightens that spot on the circle. So I want to show you how to kind of add in a little touch of light on the right side. So we're going to want to increase the exposure and then decrease the dehaze, decrease the clarity, and let's warm up this light a little bit. And we're going to feather it. And then what we can do here, let's make the circle a little smaller, is that we can drag this over to the edge of the frame. The light is looking a little green. Just want to fix that. And again, this is why we zoomed out, because if we were zoomed in, we wouldn't be able to drag this circle all the way over here. And we want to drag the circle over here so that the effect is very feathered and it's not obvious that we've put that in there. And maybe I'll increase the saturation of the light. And we can toggle this effect down here. So maybe I will make this one bigger. Oops, and I accidentally closed that out. If you accidentally close it out, just go up, click here again, and then click on the center of the circle. And let's try this. Okay, that's looking much better. Now, if you wanted to add one more, you could click New. And what we can do here is just create a new circle. Let's go a little bit smaller this time. And we'll do the same thing. Reduce the dehaze, increase the exposure, and increase the feather. And just come in here, and I just kind of want to create a little bright spot. Let's turn that light a little more yellow. And we'll make that a little bit smaller. And let's reduce the clarity. And you can just play with the settings and see what you think looks good. But I think that is looking pretty decent in terms of creating a little bit of light. The other thing that you could potentially do is increase the size of this circle and kind of treat it more like a little ray of light here. And if we did this, we would want to make this a little less aggressive. And I'll toggle this now. You can see that that's just added a little bit of light coming into the scene here. And I'm going to reduce the exposure. Okay, and that is looking pretty good. So if you want to add in some light, you can do that. If you don't worry about it. That is just kind of optional, something that I just like to do. I like to show people that it is an option. But when you're doing that, always think about where the light is coming from. In this photo, it's quite obvious it's coming from the right side because it's hitting these hills right here. If you put the light on the left side, it's going to look very weird because it's obvious that the light isn't coming from the left side. So The last thing that I want to do here is create a vignette. So we are going to use this radial filter again, and let's drag a big circle, and everything outside the circle is going to be darkened. So we want to uncheck this invert box. That's going to make it so that the effect goes outside rather than inside. Then I can drop the exposure. And I want to make sure that I'm not vignetting over here where the light is, because that wouldn't make sense that we're darkening where the light is coming from. So I can just drag my box, or anything inside the box is being kind of protected from being darkened. So somewhere about in there looks good. Let's toggle that. Okay. About right there looks good. And you can see now that we can toggle all of the effects here with our sunlight as well as our vignette. And you can see that we've really gone from an image where the viewer doesn't exactly know where to look to now it's quite obvious the viewer is walking into the image and really viewing the central subject of the scene. So that pretty much wraps up how I go about using Lightroom to edit my landscape photos. So that wraps up this week's video. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Really hope that you learned something new today. If you guys have any questions, please leave them below in the comments. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you guys next time. Thank you.